Question to start. Is it always a good thing to be close to God? Is it always a good thing to be close to God? I think in your mind you are thinking, I should say yes. That would be a good answer. But I think the book of Numbers makes us think, at least contemplate, maybe yes and no. See what happens when a perfectly holy God comes to live among a sinful people. How can it happen? Well, last week we began in the book of Numbers. We set out in this book and we saw Israel camped in their tents in the wilderness, just by Mount Sinai. Remember, this is following on from Exodus, the dramatic, sensational events when God freed his people from Egypt out of slavery. And remember, when the Israelites first arrived in Egypt, they were just a family. They were 70 people, Jacob and his sons and their households. And they were looking for food during a famine. They ended up staying in Egypt many hundred years. And in Egypt, by God's blessing, this family turned into a nation. And last week we saw maybe 2 million people. If there were 600 of them that were fighting men, that's maybe 2 million in total. And now from the wilderness, they're ready to head back to the land God promised to them generations earlier, the promised land, the land of Canaan. But if you notice in Numbers, they've stopped at the mountain for almost a year. Have you thought about that? Why so long? Why are they waiting? They're headed for the promised land. Why stop? Well, actually, I think it would have been a busy time for them. Remember, they'd received the covenant law from God. Moses, remember, he went up the mountain 40 days and got God's law to bring to the people. And when he came down the mountain, he'd have to teach the people. They were preparing to move into their land as God's nation. They needed to know how to live for him and their way of life when they entered. So maybe there was some sort of Sinai school as Moses passed on the laws that God had given him. And in the law, there were requirements to build the tabernacle, which was God's tent in the center of the camp. They had to set up its furnishings, and they had to train up the priesthood. So there were things to do before they went into the promised land. Last week we saw God starting to arrange the people for marching and for battle around the tent in the center, God's tent. So they're preparing for the conquest. And the big feature, even last week we saw the big feature of the camp is that central tent. It's called the tent of meeting. It's where God meets and dwells among the camp of Israel. Remember, every tent in the camp faced that center tent where God was. Can you just imagine each morning as the sun comes up, as you open the flap of your tent, what a reminder. There's a sign. God is with us in our midst. See, how do you think they would have felt about this? I think it would have been a comfort, but also a caution for them. See, God had chosen them. He'd remembered them in Egypt through their suffering. He'd come to visit them and help them and free them from Egypt. What a comfort that would be for them as they looked forward to the journey ahead and the conquest before them. But surely also they knew how frightening this God can be. A God of such power and purity. When God descended on Mount Sinai to give the law to Moses, remember it was covered in thick smoke. And there was lightning And Exodus says the whole camp trembled at the presence of God. So Exodus chapter 20, verse 18. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountains in smoke, they trembled with fear. See, God was impressing his majesty onto this new nation. He wanted the reality of his holiness stuck in their minds. Because God was moving from the mountain into their camp. Wonderful, but dangerous. The dwelling place of God in their midst. See, how can it work? How could it possibly work? 2 million sinful people with a holy God moving in. See, if God's holiness made the whole of Mount Sinai untouchable, in Exodus, remember it said if they even touch the mountain, they'll die. How can that God be safe in the middle of their camp? That's the great question we're answering in these chapters. We've got a lot of chapters today. We're going to move through them quickly. But that's the question in Numbers 3 to 9. The serious wonder of dwelling with a holy God. And the first thing that stands out to me as we read through this, and as we started in chapter 3, keep your guard. Keep your guard. That's point 2 on the outline. Keep your guard. See, chapter 3 begins with the one tribe that was left out of the census. Last week, the fighting men were counted, but the tribe of Levi wasn't counted with them. Levi was left out. The Levites are appointed to guard the tabernacle, the tent in the middle. And they're appointed to do the ministry of the tent. And God's reason is given plainly in chapter 1. Chapter 1, verse 53. The Levites are to set up their tents around the tabernacle of the covenant law so that my wrath will not fall on the Israelite community. See, they're guards. The Levites are guards. We've had 2 chapters counting the fighting men of Israel who will go to the outside and on the attack and defend Israel's camp. Now Numbers stops and we zoom into one tribe for the following chapters. See, it's even more important, guarding the middle tent and guarding the Israelites around the middle tent than guarding the outside of the camp. So chapter 3 begins with one particular family within the Levites. It's the family of the brothers, Moses and Aaron. And Aaron's sons are appointed as priests. And the wider tribe of Levi, they're appointed as helpers for the priests. So do you notice as we read the text, there's sort of like circles, concentric circles around the tent in the middle. In the outer camp, there are the 12 tribes we saw from chapters 1 and 2. Then around the tabernacle are the Levites. And guarding the entrance are Moses and Aaron and his sons, the priests that serve within the tent. See, the closer you come to God's presence, the greater care you need. And chapter 4 reinforces that point. We have the clans within Levi and the jobs they have serving at the tent. 2 of the clans, the Gershonites and the Merarites, they're to carry and care for the major structures of the tent. The poles, the curtains, the coverings, the bases and posts. One clan, the Kohathites, they're responsible for the holy things. The furnishings inside the tent. The ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars. And as you read in chapter 4, the detail around these things gets more and more as you get closer to the center. where God lives. So you might think the Levites, they've got sort of a special figurehead role, a representative role. But no, this is a tremendous responsibility. Chapter 3, verse 10 says, anyone else who approaches the sanctuary is to be put to death. Even the Levites can't just simply walk into that tent. Before the camp moves, we're given the details. Aaron and his sons must go in and carefully cover everything. Only once it's all covered can the Kohathites enter, and they can't pick it up with their hands. It has to have poles to be carried by. They can't touch anything. They mustn't even look at them, or they will die. And as Aaron's family is introduced, we're reminded of his two eldest sons in verse 4, Nadab and Abihu. And the mention of these names takes us back to Leviticus, the book before Numbers. The first priests after Aaron, his two oldest sons, die because they don't bring the offering in the way that God tells them to. What a start for the priesthood. The message is unmistakable. Traveling with the Holy God in your midst takes care. Extraordinary care. Well, by chapter 5, the focus starts to widen. See, the holiness of God doesn't just stop at the central tent. The holiness of God is to touch the whole camp. And so we find laws in chapter 5. Laws about ceremonial cleanness. We see in chapter 5 those with skin diseases, bodily discharges, contact with the dead, with dead bodies, are temporarily sent outside the camp because they're unclean. Now, having a skin disease or going near a dead body, these aren't sinful things. The text doesn't say that. They don't make people guilty before God. But these things are the stains of sin. These are the marks of a fallen world. The stains that sin has left on God's creation. And see, Numbers is telling us not even the stains of sin belong in the presence of God. And so they're sent outside the camp for a time. It's all very serious. Now, at this point, as I read through, I'm tempted to think it feels like a lot. This seems a bit wild. It's so foreign to us, these things. I can be tempted to think, isn't it too much? What is God doing? Is he just trying to scare people? Lightning, smoke, priests, guards, the Levites, they're called guards, coverings, don't even look, sending people outside the camp. Is God just trying to frighten people? Well, this is where chapters 5 and 6 are so important. You mightn't have thought it. Chapters 5 and 6, they're the law chapters. This happens through Numbers. When you're reading Numbers, you come to these chapters and there's what seem like random laws. And these are the chapters we're tempted to skip over, but we can't. Because here we discover that God's holiness is not just arbitrary. God's holiness is moral. That's what these law sections in Numbers teach us. Human actions actually matter to God. What we do affects our relationship with Him. Sinful human actions distance people from God. See the safety barriers, the Levites around the tent, they're not there for a show. They're there for safety. They are real guards because sinful people cannot go casually into the presence of a holy God. And so the holiness of the central tent, it needs to spread out into the whole camp. God's law teaches us holiness is for every tent in Israel. And so we read in chapters 5 and 6 laws about dishonesty, laws protecting marriage, laws preserving trust. The whole camp is to reflect the holiness of the center tent, the God who lives among them. Well, if you've understood Numbers so far, you might think you've learned one lesson. Stay away from God. But friends, that would be a terrible mistake, a terrible misunderstanding. See, the movement of these chapters is actually the opposite. The whole movement of these chapters is that God can live amongst them. All these guards, all these warnings, all this careful preparation, it's there so that God can come from the mountain into the camp and so that his people can draw near to him just with the right amount of care. So think of the laws in chapter 5 and 6. Even the laws that separate people, that send them out of the camp, it's actually to prepare for them to come back. There is a ring outside the camp for those who are unclean, but in the text it clearly says they're not discarded. They're still a part of the camp. They're sent outside until they are clean. The camp belongs to them, the law says. Their temporary exclusion protects the holiness of the camp because they're coming back in. They still belong. Or think about the special law in chapter 6. There's a law in chapter 6, the Nazirite vow. And you see some characters through the Bible who take this special vow that's in the law of Numbers. Samson is one of the guys in the Bible who takes this vow. So when you take this vow, the law says in Numbers, you abstain from wine, you keep away from dead bodies, you let your hair grow as a sign of your commitment. But this law here in Numbers, it's quite striking because we've just come from 2 chapters about the holiness of the priests, what's required of the priests to be consecrated for God. And then suddenly God gives a law where any Israelite can become something like a priest. A special season of priest-like devotion for a Nazirite who chooses to make that vow. And the language around the Nazirite is very similar to the language you read for the priests, especially the details about staying away from dead bodies. See, the laws are not actually trying to keep people away from God. The laws are providing a way to come close to a holy God, making it possible to draw near. And this particularly hones us in now on the preparation for the priests in chapter 7 and 8. So we really see in chapter 7 and 8 what the guards are for. The priests and Levites are not barriers between God and his people, not ultimately to block the way. They are mediators, not barriers, but mediators. Their task is to bring people in to God. And Numbers chapter 7, it's a long chapter. Have you ever read Numbers chapter 7? 89 verses. I remember when my Bible reading plan comes to number 7, I've learned this. I need to give myself the will to make it through number 7. It's a very exciting chapter. It's there because the tabernacle's about to open for the first time. But it gives the detail of the exact same offering. Over 12 days, 12 tribes bring the exact same offering, repeated 12 times, 6 verses each, a long chapter. And you think, why does he need to say it 12 times? Couldn't he just say what the offering is? Then every tribe brought their offering. God wants every tribe named. Every tribe of Israel equally come to God's altar. Judah and Issachar at the start, right down to Asher and Naphtali, all bring an offering. Day after day, repeated 12 times. And see the detail within that repeated offering they bring. One male goat for a sin offering. Every tribe comes to God in exactly the same way. No tribe approaches God on its own merit. Every tribe must come to the tent through atonement. And because God has given them priests and Levites to minister on their behalf, to offer the sacrifices, every tribe is welcome into God's presence. See how chapter 8 sums it up. From among all the Israelites, I have given the Levites as gifts to Aaron and his sons to do the work at the tent of meeting on behalf of the Israelites and to make atonement for them so that no plague will strike the Israelites when they go near the sanctuary. See it? Atonement. So that the tribes may go near. The priests and Levites, they're not ultimately to keep Israel away from God. They're God's provision to bring Israel in safely into the presence of God. And see the tremendous result. Ultimate blessing. All the systems and safeguards, the rules and regulations, the priests, the Levites, the sacrifices, the laws, what are they all for? The gift is God Himself. His presence in their camp. After the altar has been dedicated and the priests, the Levites, they've been washed and consecrated for service, chapter 9 gives it a wonderfully simple moment. Chapter 9, verse 15. On the day the tabernacle, the tent of the covenant law, was set up, the cloud covered it. From evening till morning, the cloud above the tabernacle looked like fire. See, God moves in. The cloud that brought trembling at Mount Sinai now settles in the Israelite camp. And from God's presence, the blessings flow. First, God speaks. Chapter 7, verse 89. When Moses entered the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord, he heard the voice of God speaking to him. See, again, we're just too familiar with this idea of hearing God's voice. We fly over a verse like this. The God who fashioned the universe with His voice. The God whose voice strips forests bare. That voice comes into the Israelite camp to speak with Moses in the tent in the middle. See, the God who's dwelling with them, He's not going to be silent. His guiding word ever present with them for the journey ahead. What a gift! And Moses passes on these words of life and assurance for the Israelites. What a blessing. Moses mediating the word of God. And then Aaron. Aaron has a ministry mediating as a priest. Listen again to the words Aaron is commanded to speak. Aaron's blessing as a priest, Numbers 6:24. This is God's instruction for Aaron and the priests. This is how you are to bless the Israelites. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. See, after reading chapters 5 and 6, all those laws, you might think, how can anyone possibly enjoy God's favour? Who isn't unclean at some point? See, even the Nazirite with that special vow loses his or her status, if someone unfortunately dies near them. The priests themselves, they have to bring offerings for themselves first, for their own sin, before they can offer for anyone else. Who could be holy enough to receive God's blessing? Well, Aaron's priestly blessing answers that fear. God delights to bless his people. They haven't earned it. He has made a way for them to live in his presence. He blesses them by his grace. Notice what the blessing is. Numbers 6:25. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. The blessing is God himself, his face turning to them. See, in the ancient world, only a handful of privileged people would ever see the face of the king. We've got cameras and internet, Instagram. In those days, to see the king's face was a privilege. I remember Esther in the Old Testament. She goes into the king with trembling, and she's married to him. She goes with fear whether the king will turn his face to her. See, to have the king's face towards you is life. To have God's face shine on you is grace and peace and fullness. This is the blessing of God in their midst. And see in Numbers what brilliant timing in all of this. It's now 1 year since the Exodus. Chapter 9, it's the anniversary, the first Passover. 1 year ago, think back, they were slaves. A year ago, they were sheltered beneath the blood on the doorpost, the blood of a lamb. A year ago, they fled Egypt in a rush, dropping things along the way. They were a rabble, not a nation. Now look at them. God dwelling in their midst. His word guiding them. His face shining on them. His cloud leading them. They are ready to go to the promised land. What blessed wonder! God in our midst. What blessed wonder, dwelling with a holy God. So what about you, friends? What about us? How do you live when you live with a holy God? Everything we've seen in Numbers hasn't been left behind. It's been fulfilled. The priests, the sacrifices, the tabernacle, all of it points to Jesus. We heard it in our Hebrews reading, Hebrews 10. Through Jesus' once for all sacrifice, we have confidence to enter the most holy place. The barriers haven't been ignored. They've been crossed by one mediator between God and man, the man Jesus Christ. His blood, perfect holiness. And now through his blood and by his Spirit, we are holy. God dwells in us. God has shone the light of His glory on us in the face of Jesus Christ. In Jesus, Christians have every spiritual blessing in the heavenly realms, Ephesians shows us. See, God is not just at a tent in the center of your neighborhood. He's pitched His tent in your heart. At the very core of your being, the holy God dwells. How do you live when you dwell with a holy God? Do you live with serious wonder, friends? I want to finish with this verse from 2 Corinthians chapter 7. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. It says, "Therefore, since we have these promises, dear friends, since we have these promises, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God." Just quickly think of Paul's logic here. The God whose majesty shook Mount Sinai, that God has made promises to us. Can you believe it? The verses before this talk about what the promises are, that God has come to us, even the nations of the world, to make us His people. He says in chapter 6, "I will live with them and walk among them." He says, "I will be a father to you and you will be my sons and daughters." See, what is our right response? Fear. The NIV puts the word reverence, but the word is actually fear. And after Numbers, we can get a sense why Paul chooses to use that word. A fear of God is a phrase that we don't use much anymore as Christians. We prefer words like respect or reverence. They feel a bit safer. But after Numbers, those words are too tame. We ought to fear God. Not running scared, friends. Let's be clear about that. We are not scared of God. We're not running away from Him. But the fear that trembles as you draw near to Him. No, we're not afraid of our Father. He's a Father to us. We're not afraid of our Father. The nearer we are to Him, the more blessed we are. Our highest joy is to live with Him, with His face shining on us. But it leads us to trembling holiness. If God has come to dwell with us, how could we ever treat sin lightly? How could we hear God's word and not respond? How could we ever drift back? We will pray. We will pray, yes, we will pray that we will not grieve Him, that He would keep us from wandering, that He would have mercy on us in our weakness and keep us, making us holy for His Son's sake. Overwhelmed by His goodness and majesty and holiness and grace and righteousness, by all that God is, God's people tremble. To come face to face with our holy gods means we cannot contain ourselves. The dazzling splendor of God must cause us to quake. The serious wonder of dwelling with a holy God.